5 years ago, people said, well, how can the United States export? It's really not an export country. But in fact, exports in this country have been going up. I think they continue to go. They can continue to go up. But I think we have to do the right things in this country: education, research and development, a better infrastructure, proper financing. A whole range of things need to be done in order to strengthen the manufacturing sector in this country and strengthen the overall economy. And if we do that, and if companies make the right kinds of investments, and in the end, the companies are really the key to this. The government can be helpful, but the companies are the key. Then I do think the chances of a stronger manufacturing sector and a stronger export sector in general are actually quite good. It's not easy because there's an enormous amount of competition, but given the right kinds of policies, I think we can do it. And to put it another way, the worst thing we can do is be defeatist about it and say, well, we've got competition from China and Korea and all these other countries, and therefore we're not going to be able to export, we're not going to be able to compete. We've demonstrated decade after decade after decade that the United States, with the right kinds of policies and the right kind of attitude, can be competitive. But the worst way of looking at it would be to become defeatist, to turn inward, to turn away from global engagement. That guarantees a negative outcome with respect to exports, and it means that we will not be able to take advantage of opportunities in the global economy. If we take a more positive point of view and we do the right things domestically, some of them will not be easy, then I do think we have a chance of being a robust exporter for many years to come. I thank you very much.
On behalf of APACC, you all know that I only wear Dominic Pangborn's tie. So on behalf of APACC, we'd like to present you a good friend, Road artist Dominic Pangborn. Thank you again.
I know if I'm wearing the kind of ties you're wearing, they'll be in style.
We're still pretty good on schedule. I'll just talk faster. Our next speaker is Mr. Dana Johnson from Comerica. Hang on a second, I've got to go to his bios. I can skip the bio. All right, he'll teach us everything about economics and what we need to look out for in the next few years. Please welcome Dana Johnson.
Can you hear me? No. No? No. No. You can't hear me. What do you want to do?
Any requests for songs? Now.
My guess all this was made in China. All right. Okay, I'm actually glad not to have to stand behind a podium. I hate podiums. And so I'm going to wander around. And I want to talk to Mr. Hormats did all the heavy lifting on the international linkages. I'm going to fall back on what I often talk about, which is what is going to happen to Michigan in the next year or so. And to do that, you really have to rely on the basic theme of what he was talking about, which is that we're all in this together. That let me see if there we go. That what happens globally helps us if trends are positive. What happens nationally helps Michigan if trends are positive. And I wanted to start off by making this case. I have some charts here, and what I've charted here is Michigan growth year by year in gross state product, and above it is the growth of the United States. And we've had in Michigan unusual problems. We all know that. You know, there was a time when I was first living in the state that I talked about Michigan having a one-state recession, and then we had a national recession. And then I kind of thought, well, Michigan had a one-state depression, given that it was so troubled for so long. And so you have this sense, if you live here in Michigan, that things have been very different here and very much more troubled than the rest of the country. But yet, despite that, the correlation of growth from 1991 to 1999 between the U.S. and Michigan was 0.74. Very closely correlated. So that is to make the point that to understand what's going to happen here in Michigan, you have to understand what's going to happen nationally. The trends that play out nationally play out here. We have our special issues and differences and strengths and weaknesses that make that not a lockstep type of move down the road together. But boy, you really have to start. If you really want to have a view of what's going to happen in Michigan, you have to have a view of what's going to happen nationally. So that's what I wanted to talk about. First is nationally, and then move it to Michigan. And here's a chart which, to me, is a good place to start. It shows the level of real GDP nationally. You can see that we had a peak back in the fourth quarter of 2007, and then we had 6 quarters of recession till we got to a trough in the second quarter of 2009. And now we've had 6 quarters of recovery. And after 6 quarters of recovery, we are just a hair higher than we were at the previous peak. It took us 6 quarters to return to the previous peak. Well, how does that compare to past business cycles? In all the other post-war business cycles, it never took us more than 3 quarters to get back to the previous peak. And usually it took us only 2. In one case, it only took us 1 quarter. So it really was an unusually long and deep recession, and it really was an unusually sluggish recovery, taking 6 quarters to get back to the previous peak. But we're beginning to move, okay, so why was that? Or what has been the source of growth? What has not been the source of growth? And to me, this chart shows the growth over the 4 quarters of 2010, last year, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th quarters of recovery. And over those 6 quarters, durable goods grew about 15% in real terms. The output of durable goods in the United States grew 15%. Nothing else grew much at all. Non-durable goods up about 2%, services up about 1%, and structures down about 3%. And that's why we had such a bum recovery. It's the structures part of it. Usually structures, home building in particular, is something that leads you back after a recession. It's still contracting. And that's why we've had sort of this half-speed kind of recovery. We had an absolutely terrific recovery in manufacturing, particularly durable manufacturing, and none at all, even further contraction in construction. That's why we've had this half-speed recession. What has contributed to that durable goods? Well, the answer is everything. This shows the contribution in 2010 of the 3 main things that create demand for durable goods. Consumer durable goods contributed about 0.5% to real GDP growth. It's by far the biggest sector of our economy, consumer spending, and increased consumption of durable goods contributed about 0.5%. Capital equipment was quite a bit stronger, almost 1%. There really was a big bounce back in capital spending. Businesses kind of panicked in 2008, 2009, completely shut down their capital spending because they thought we were headed for another great depression. We weren't, it was just a recession. And so they kind of came roaring back. But the strongest component to demand for durable goods was exports of durable goods. Isn't it remarkable? I mean, it really makes the point that what happens globally as well as nationally kind of reflects back here into Michigan. The strongest component that accounted for the biggest part of that 15% rise in durable manufacturing was exports. get into that business. This chart shows 3 different measures of home prices. There's a bunch of different ways we measure home prices, none of them very good. They all have weaknesses, they all have strengths. And what I've shown here is the annualized growth over the most recent 6 months. And what comes out of this is that at some speed, home prices are still declining nationally. And so long as that continues, we're not going to have any meaningful recovery in home building. Because if you're sitting there saying, I don't really need to buy another house, but I'd like to buy another house, I don't care how low the mortgage rate is, you're not going to pull the trigger on that in all likelihood if you think that house price is going to continue to fall another 5 or 10%. The most important thing in figuring out whether you want to buy a house is whether you think house prices have stabilized and beginning to rise again. And they're not, they haven't. And there's good reason to be concerned that with a big shadow inventory of foreclosed houses that still is looming out there, and we have about 2 million more houses, unsold houses, than we typically need. There's a good reason to fear the house prices could continue to decline. And so we're not going to have virtually any contribution to growth this year, in my judgment, from home building, because we're still seeing declines in prices. So we're not going to have a broad-based and vigorous recovery with all parts of the economy contributing to growth. But we are going to have, in my judgment, we are seeing a subtle acceleration in hiring, which is a key component to seeing that private sector kind of led recovery that we want to have. What I've charted here is over overlapping 3-month periods, the growth in non-farm payrolls. And we just got in February a real nice increase, about 200,000 increase in non-farm payrolls. And it was sort of celebrated in the stock market and in the newspapers. But unfortunately, it probably was celebrated more than it deserved. Because in January, we only had about 50,000 increase in payrolls. Because we had big weather effects that held payrolls down in January. And you really had to put that February rebound in the context of that January number. And so you can see in the last observation plot here is the 3-month growth in non-farm payrolls. In January, it's just barely higher than it was in a couple of previous months. In fact, if you look at the growth over the second half of last year in non-farm payrolls, it was 1%, and the growth over the first 2 months of this year was 1.1%. So yeah, there's a subtle improvement underway in the economy with a little bit more hiring, but it has not been the decisive breakout that you might have thought if you just looked at the most recent February reading. But things are going to get better. I'm very much convinced of that. And this chart is, just let me quickly say, these shaded areas are recession. What I've charted here is the growth in output per hour, the growth in productivity. And if you look at the chart, after every recession,